Good morning. With the stalemate continuing in Ladakh, I want to make 2 points, then I'll explain why I have made these 2 points. My first point is what I have maintained right from when the crisis started 5 months back, that there will be no war and there will be no escalation. Reason? Because even today, the Indian army is not ready for the war it believes it needs to fight. As far as the PLA is concerned, the time is not ripe for them. My second point is there are a lot of military analysts, retired generals, who've been writing, who've been talking, giving out videos where they say that now the Indian army should be ready to launch attacks and recover, if not all the occupied areas by PLA, but certain areas by the PLA. I say this is an impossible military objective. Reason? Because the concept of operations or the warfighting doctrine today of the Indian military and the PLA are 3 generations apart. I will explain this. But let me first start with my first point where I say that the Indian army is not ready even today for war. Now, you see, for war, more fundamental, more critical than the habitat, ecosystem, and the training are communications. What is the point of having soldiers, let's say on the Kailash range? Our soldiers did a brilliant job on the night of 29th, 30th August. They occupied these vacant heights. But they are sitting there now, and if they are unable to communicate rearwards, let's say with their battalion headquarters, brigade, or division headquarters, and they in turn can't communicate because the communications are getting disrupted, they are getting degraded, they are getting jammed by the PLA across, sitting across. How do you fight a war without communications? Now, so the communications are not good. Why I say that is because only yesterday the Cabinet Committee on Security has cleared a major project, a communication project of the army, where a private company has been co opted to lay down the fiber optic cables, the microwave, the radio wave, the satellite communications. All this is to be done. The whole idea is that the communication should be secure and possibly it should be possible not only voice communication, data communication, video communication, all should be possible. And this whole project is a positive move, but unfortunately, this will take 36 months, 3 years, which means that 3 years, for 3 years, the Indian Army communications will always be, there will be a doubt on the level of communications. Now think back 3 years. Today is 2020. In 2017, Doklam happened. 3 years back. If we had read Doklam correct, then the communication, the fiber optic cables laying should have started then, and today we would have been perhaps ready to take on the PLA at least in communications. But we misread Doklam completely. Nobody here ever thought, why will the PLA start a crisis at a place where it is tactically disadvantaged, where it can never win? Because all the heights have been occupied by the Indian army, surrounding heights. Why will they start a crisis there? It never occurred to anybody that subsequent to their 2015 military reforms, whereby they created the Western Theatre Command facing India, geographically their largest command, now they had to bring in the troops there. Now, if they were to bring in large number of troops, they would be going against the letter and the spirit of 2 agreements signed between India and China, the agreement of 1993 and the agreement of 1996, wherein it is clearly laid down the number of forces, the number of equipment, missiles, war material, even the level of exercises that each can do close to the line of actual control, that had to be done by mutual agreement and mutual consent. Now, if the PLA were to disregard these two agreements, they would be labeled as aggressors. That would go against their claim of a peaceful rise, which in turn will affect their geostrategic plans encapsulated in the Belt and Road Initiative and the China Dream. They didn't want to be seen as aggressors, they wanted the Indian army to be the aggressors. And therefore, they conceived the Doklam plan. They started a crisis at a place where they expected the Indian army to react because it was holding all the heights and it had a special relationship with Bhutan. Now, the second problem was, what if the Indian army generals decide that, look, we are holding the heights, we are at an advantageous position, we don't need accretion of forces, we don't need any further forces. So they came up with the second part of the plan, which was they unleashed the wolf warriors. And their entire state media went ballistic drumming war drums that a war was imminent. And it had the desired effects. India's topmost army commander at that time, Eastern Army Commander General Praveen Bakshi, he is on record after retirement saying that while he was convinced there would be no war, but the situation was such where he could not disregard war preparedness. So the Indian army forces were brought in. The moment that happened, PLA also brought in their forces. After the crisis, the Indian army went back, they never went back. They added their numbers, more and more forces, created a habitat, created an ecosystem. For the last year and a half, they've been doing military training there. It was there for everybody to see. Now, if they were doing the training there, how much time does it take them, or did it take them, to convert that training into multi-pronged attacks in Ladakh, which is precisely what they did? And the Indian analyst and everybody here said it's an intelligence failure of the army. Everybody started looking for scapegoats in the army, that they didn't get to know that the PLA would do these multi-pronged attacks and be the first movers and come and occupy our territory. But that was not the problem. The problem was that I remember a year after the Doklam crisis, I spoke to a general and I asked him, I said, look, they are adding their numbers, they are creating a habitat, they want to be here permanently, what are you doing about it? His response was that, look, our soldiers have been holding these heights. Now we are talking of 15,000 feet and above since 1993. Whereas these people have been there in their comfort zone in the rear. Now let them also come and stay here and know what it is to be at these heights and this inclement weather. This was the India's response. You see, if we had read Doklam correct, the fiber optic cable work would have started then, would have been accomplished now. At least on communications, we would have been at par with the PLA. And number two, Ladakh would not have happened in the first place, because the Indian army would have taken the corrective measures. So there would have been no surprise element here at all. So when I said there was no intelligence failure, nobody believed me. I did a video on that. Now 4 months or 5 months into the crisis, we now have a report on 25th September in the Economic Times paper. Now here a source has told to a very credible journalist. Now this is what he quotes. The source saying, a senior source, the PLA always had the capability in Tibet, but the intention changed overnight. There was no intelligence failure, as it is impossible to get the last minute intelligence of when a formation decides to move ahead. In such a case, the first mover has the advantage. Simple. So we just got Doklam completely wrong. Now I move to my second point, where we are getting Ladakh completely wrong. Because we do not seem to understand the big gap in the concept of operations between the Indian military and the PLA. Why I say that is, please consider the two front war strategy. This was coined in 2009, it continues today, and this is the basis for the CDS General Rawat's futuristic reforms also. Two front war thinking. The basic or the fundamental issue in this two front war thinking is that there are two fronts, Pakistan and China. The fronts will not start, or they will not, there will be a primary front, there will be a secondary front, and it will be possible to shift the forces from the secondary front to the primary front and vice versa. So there are certain dual use formations of the Indian Army which the army leadership believes today they can be shifted from one theatre to another to bolster the strength at the place where it is required. This presupposes that both the theatres have a similar concept of operations. That means the way the Pakistan military fights is exactly the way the PLA will fight, and this is wrong. It is wrong because for decades the Indian military has been only focused on the Pakistan front. Our concept of operations over the years, they have developed keeping that front in mind. And what the Indian military today has, and on which basis it is talking of a two front shifting of forces, is the 80s air-land battle doctrine. This is what the Indian military is today training at. Air-land battle. It has 7 characteristics. I will tell you. The first is, as the name suggests, it has 2 domains. It has a land, it's a air. Number 2, there's no jointness, there is coordination. That means the air element and the land element, they'll coordinate with one another. So there is no real-time communication between the two, there's no networking between the two. Third, the emphasis in this doctrine is on domain characteristics and geography. Domain characteristics primarily means the core competencies of the two domains and the time responses, because the air and the land component will have different core competencies and the time responses. Geography means that we are looking at terrain and we are looking at the climatic condition. When you focus here, then your operational patterns of both your side and the enemy, they are more or less predictable in this doctrine. Next point. This whole doctrine will be led by the land forces, which is the army, which means the burden of the victory falls on the soldier, which means the soldier, he is at the end of the kill chain. Next point. The Air Force. Air Force will fight its own war, and for that it needs OODA. Now OODA is what we all know: observe, orient, decide and act. This calls for networking of all the Air Force assets, and right now the networking of the Air Force airborne assets and space assets, it is underway. This realization came in 2019 Balakot, and right now it's going on, so they are not ready with their OODA network. Next, since they have their separate networks, and because now the digitization is happening within the services, so all these capabilities like electronic warfare, like cyber capabilities, it will be done individually by the services. Basically, they will be trying to secure their networks or digitization, whatever has happened. In other words, offensive capabilities in both the domains will not be there. Next point. The cyber and space capability now today, as an upgraded air-land battle version, the Indian military is recognizing that they are now separate domains, but it still sees them as a force multiplier. Both the cyber and the space domain, they are under CDS Rawat. Now, how exactly they'll be used in this air-land battle is still not clear to the forces or to anybody else. So this is the war which the Indian military intends to fight under its two-front war thinking, is not the war that the PLA is preparing for or is prepared for. Because the PLA right from the beginning decided that their main enemy was US military. So, when 1991 Gulf War happened, which was the US led forces against Iraq, for the PLA, the important thing was, of course, the stealth fighters, the effect based operation, long range guided munition, which they used, the US military used. But the most important thing to them was the battle networks. For the first time in a war, any power, and US was the first power which had shown the capabilities of the battle networks. So there were four networks. The first network was the sensor network, which was for the space and battlefield awareness. This was the sensor loop or the sensor network. The second was the command and control network, where the feed from the sensors would come to the command and control, and there they would see all the options and decide on the best option and then pass it on to the third network, which is the shooter loop. All the elements which then have to destroy the target, whether it is an air shooter or it is a land shooter, that will be decided by the command and control. And the fourth network was about operational logistics to support these three networks. Now, the PLA as early as 1994 came to the conclusion that they did not have the technology capability to match the US prowess. So what should they do? The US had showcased to the world the network-centric operations. So they came up with the asymmetrical response, which was the information warfare. So the PLA calls this information warfare exactly what the American military says network-centric warfare. Now, to explain this information warfare, it would be better to say this warfare should actually be called the systems destruction warfare. The whole idea was, how can we destroy the networks? This was the aim of the PLA. They had to build the capability to snap these networks, because if the communication nodes, if they get snapped, then the networks don't work. If the sensor feed is not reaching the command and control, or it's not going to the shooter in time, and time is critical, so everything collapses. So they build capabilities in order to attack these sensors, attack the networks. So capabilities in four areas were built, which was cyber, electronic warfare, space warfare, and ballistic and cruise missiles. The PLA started building capabilities in these four areas as early as 1994, and today the US military acknowledges that if they are not ahead, if the PLA is not ahead in some of these capabilities, they are certainly a peer competitor. And these are the four areas that they've been honing for the last 26 years. And completely focused on what the US military was doing. What the US military did was, by the turn of the century, as the technology evolved, more war domains came up. In addition to the three physical war domains of land, air and sea, three more were added: cyberspace and electromagnetic, which is basically the electromagnetic spectrum management that was added. So they spoke of a domain warfare. But they realized it was getting unwieldy, so all the three services, rather four services, the Army, Air Force, Navy and Marines, they all have to be brought in together. And this is what came to be known, this is what they are working on. This is called the multi-domain warfare, or their joint all-domain warfare. So as the US military evolved, so did the information war or the systems destruction war of the PLA. Once they came up with this concept of joint all domain warfare, the Americans realized that there were three critical shortcomings in this. The first shortcoming was that whereas the services were networked between the services, inter-service, they still did not have satisfactory machine-to-machine communications. It was still manual communication and coordination which was unacceptable. The second shortfall was that the kill chains or the networks, they were inflexible. They didn't have flexibility. And once so many domains came in an inflexible network, which was conceived during the first Gulf War, they became very vulnerable to cyber attack, electronic warfare, because if anything gets snapped, immediately it has an effect. Everything else comes down like a pack of cards because of the inflexibility of the kill chains. And the third thing was they realized that the Americans had created actually a lot of big ticket items, assets. For example, the F-22. It was conceived and designed even when the Cold War was going on. So the Americans had these assets, the F-22, the F-35, they had tanks which would take decades to fructify from the conceptualization to the operationalization. Whereas what the adversary could do is build the entire weapons. For example, for a tank, the time it takes for it to fructify, in that duration, 6th generation of anti-tank missiles have come up which are much cheaper. So it was realized that they had to move away now from this, from the big ticket items, because of this anti-weapons which were coming in a very high speed into the battle space. So these were the shortcomings, major shortcomings. So today, the US military is thinking about an entirely new concept, what they call the fusion or the mosaic warfare. Now in this, instead of the kill chain, they will have a kill web. So they will have many permutation and combination. The whole idea is that it should not happen that if one network or something gets snapped in the kill chain, the operation cannot happen. Something else should get connected. So that is it's a big concept of a mosaic warfare. Similarly, now the PLA also moved on from the information warfare to what they call the intelligence-sized warfare. Now, this whole thing got a push, a impetus after 2010, when artificial intelligence and disruptive technologies, they also came on the scene. So this mosaic warfare, intelligence warfare, is basically about these disruptive technologies and artificial intelligence. So both sides, the Americans and the PLA, they are working on these concepts. They are working on these technologies. This is where they stand today. Now, if I just talk of today, I'll just pause here, then I'll start again. Today, a situation has come where, let's say, if the Indian army decides to do an attack, try and capture some territory, regain some territory, what stops the PLA from pulling back their border guards? Mind you, in Ladakh, what they have against the Indian army are their border guards. Now, border guards are much more than our paramilitary forces because they are directly under the command of the PLA. They have PLA officers, but their primary job is to be the first line of defense or the first line of offense. This is their job. So, what stops the PLA from pulling back the border guards and unleashing their systems destruction warfare that I spoke about, the four capabilities: cyber, electronic warfare, space, and ballistic and cruise missiles? This is all standoff capabilities. No contact is required in any of them. Now, so this is where we stand today. But where the Americans and the PLA are going are, as I said, towards intelligence-sized warfare. I must say a bit about this warfare, that this warfare is absolutely unique. When I say unique, it will be revolutionary. It is not a evolutionary warfare, like going from the air land battle going on to the network centric warfare. That is all evolution. In this case, insofar as the technology side is concerned, what we will see is, we will see convergence of artificial intelligence and something like 20 disruptive technologies. All of these are being incubated in the commercial side. This will be a big change. And because of this big technology change, what will happen on the operational side is that the focus will shift entirely from domains and geography to time critical mission sets. This is the revolutionary part. And this is the part where, I mean, this is my work that I'm doing now. And this is where the PLA will be ready against a middle power like India by 2025, in my assessment, 5 years from now. Against a formidable peer competitor like US, they have given a deadline of 2035, which is 15 years from now. Now, when I say 2025, they'll be ready with this war. This is around the time that we will put up our communications, secure communications of the war that we conceive. I will stop at that. I'll let the viewer think the rest, that what exactly will happen. Thank you so much. If you like this video, please do subscribe. The subscription is free. Thank you so much.